retains these ideas of patriarchal authority. So, as that the man of the household should determine what should make all the major decisions. But as the first woman indicated, it was her way, her ticket to get out from behind the plow in a farm in Texas. It was her way of taking part in the migration the Great Migration from the South to the cities of the North and West, and getting into a position where she could become a worker in her own right and make money. But women's employment was a threat to the authority within the male authority within the home, and thus women going to work was an area of struggle. And of these three women, two of them got divorces. They divorced their first husbands because their first husbands weren't willing to accept that their wives were intelligent women capable of making decisions on their own part. And so if marriage for a woman was a way of creating her own life, getting some independence, then you're going to be less inclined to accept the arbitrary male authority, especially when it seems stupid, because who wouldn't benefit from having the extra money that a woman brought in? Yes?
Was that the 2 out of 3 women in the video, or
2 out of 3 women in the video?
No,
by the 1940s, about 1 out of 8 marriages are ending in divorce. But I think if you probably crunch the numbers to restrict it to generation, that you would see that the numbers for younger women or younger people would be higher, because a generation had emerged that was in the same way that they would decide to get married at 15, like the first woman, or 17, like the second woman, or 18, like the third woman, then they might equally well decide this marriage is not working, it's bad for me, I'm moving on. But with the assumption that she's going to find someone else who would be a better partner in life. Yes?
So the 2 women were divorced.
Pardon? The first 2. Yeah. One of the ways that business this really comes into play starting in the 1940s, but one of the ways that businesses dealt with the labor shortage was to want to hire women, increasingly hire women. Women worked for less, so it was good for the businesses. They also tended to want to work on a part-time or temporary basis, and which allowed for more flexibility in terms of scheduling. But this generation is also moving towards an idea of what some people have called companionate marriage. That is, instead of the male of the family being the authority figure, making the decisions, that the decisions should be made jointly by the husband and wife, that they're a team. This was a message that was being promoted widely in the mass media, in magazines and the movies. It also perhaps makes sense because, let's be honest, how many 19-year-old men are ready to be patriarchal authority figures? They may know how to play act the role, but they probably don't have the experience to make decisions based on, okay, I know this such and such happens when. So even the lowering of the marriage age leads to a situation where there's greater equality in effect between the man and the woman, and reinforces this push to think of marriage as a partnership of equals with different responsibilities. That particular idea was opposed by many churches. who often, particularly the more conservative religions, continually reinforce the idea of patriarchal authority. We'll discuss that a little bit when we get to religion, which will be pretty soon. But this idea of husband and wife as equals, but with distinct responsibilities, was the norm in Hollywood movies and in mass circulation journals. There was a constant barrage of images that said that marriages worked best when husband and wife were friends, playmates, lovers, and made all their important decisions together, were partners. But even though these ideas were very prominent in the culture, that doesn't mean that the older ideas of female subordination just went away or were simply replaced with these new ideas. In fact, you're dealing with a situation which probably certainly continued into my generation's experience, and maybe still at play in yours, but that'll be determined, in which there's the ideas, these two contending ideas or contrasting ideas are at play in most people's lives. I should add to this is that the number of people getting married at any one time also rose dramatically. So at the end of the 19th century, approximately 75% of adults were married at any given time. By the 1940s, it was 92%. It's a major increase. If you weren't married by the time you were 24, it was terribly odd. Terribly, terribly odd. And it could have negative consequences on your ability to get promotion if you were a white-collar worker. You were not considered a stable person if you were unmarried. A perpetual adolescent. Maybe that's what's happened to all of us, but I think, actually these interviews are much longer and they're all online, so one could at least read the transcripts. There's an interesting way in which the women are going back and forth between actually believing that wives should be subordinate to their husband's will, but they also have to be lively people, and husbands need to treat their wives with respect. But wives may also expect husbands to be manly, that is, to be bossy and make decisions. And they have to go to work and so forth. And so it was a mixture of ideas that were confusing for people. Now, World War II, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I think is really a benchmark because it forever changed the position, not forever, but it has since then changed the position of women in the economy. Prior to World War II, approximately 1 out of 5 women at any given time was in the paid workforce. Generally speaking, a woman worked until she got married and then she stopped working. After World War II, during and after World War II, the number of women in the paid workforce rose dramatically, so that by 1960, 82% of women are in the paid workforce, and it's become typical for married women to be working as well as being mothers. So the transformation really takes place during and after the war, but it's set in place, I think, by these changing ideas that are going on. Let's see. And I think a lot of this is wrapped up with questions of personal autonomy, which I think should be thought of as something different from freedom. That you're seeking the ability to be able to have responsibility for your lives, to have the decision-making capacity, but you accept that no person is really free. That you're always in a situation of mutual responsibility. Now, demographers have been trying to get looking at statistics carefully, and they're trying to figure out what's going on in everyday life. And comparisons of marriages with the birth of first child, which have been done, it's a very difficult thing to do, actually. It's not an easy thing to correlate the date of marriage with the birth of the first child. And so in the communities where this has been studied, the rate varies, but between 1880 and 1940, a minimum of 1/3 of children and a maximum of 1/2 of children were born less than 9 months after the parents were married. So the basic figure is that 40% of young couples where the woman was already pregnant at the time of marriage. So in that case, marriage was probably not a question of personal autonomy, but trying to figure out how to fix a desperate situation. It was forced in a sense. Now you have to remember this is a period where in 2/3 of the states contraception is illegal, and it's basically impossible to get to end a pregnancy with an abortion, and, at least legally. And so if two people get together, they like each other, or they're having a good time, and the woman gets pregnant, that's a sign from God that you're meant to be husband and wife. Getting married was a practical necessity. There was a solution that depended upon a man's sense of responsibility and honor. So this was also wrapped up with it. And that might be connected with how mobile he was. So it's interesting, demographers say that after 1945, this rate of 40% begins to decline, and after 1965, pregnancy becomes an insignificant factor in marriage. The Kinsey studies conducted in the 1940s and 50s indicate that between 1900 and 1940, 80% of men had had consensual, unpaid sexual intercourse before marriage with women other than their future wife. Well, and 45% had had sex with their bride-to-be before marriage in 1900, 61% in 1910, 50% in 1920, and 57% in 1925. This is to give you an idea of how moral standards function practically. Yes?
What about women?
I'm getting there. Women reported having had sexual intercourse before marriage